Greetings and welcome to another episode of How I See It. I want to take you back in time, specifically back to a time when parents were actually parents. Let me explain what I'm talking about. I recently visited a large department store and I witnessed two similar but different scenes that left me shaking my head. In the first, a young father pushed his small son through the aisles in a shopping cart. The child spotted something he wanted and the father said no. Instantly, chaos erupted. The child screamed, kicked, and threw a full blown temper tantrum. The father stood there absorbing this punishment being handed out by someone who still needed help tying their shoes. A toddler was, in fact, disciplining the parent. A few hours later, I saw a very similar situation. Another father and his young daughter had been told no. Her response wasn't screaming. No, it was much more sophisticated. It was arguing endlessly. She negotiated, protested, and challenged every answer the father gave. Meanwhile, her exhausted father worked overtime trying to reassure her that her feelings and perspective were valued. And what really sent me over the edge was when he said, "I want to make sure you understand you're being heard." As I watched, one question kept running through my mind. When did parents stop being parents? Now, I don't claim to have all the answers, and I definitely wasn't the best father that ever was. But I know this: neither of those scenes would have ended that way when I was a child, or in fact, when my kids were children. Why? Because we were taught to honor our parents and respect them. We understood that there were consequences for disrespect, disobedience, and public outbursts. Those consequences were swift, certain, and most assuredly they were effective. There were no lengthy negotiations, no debates, no attempts to reason with a child in the middle of a meltdown. We knew what the boundaries were, and we knew what happened when we crossed them. But somewhere along the way, that changed. Perhaps it began when our culture started celebrating self indulgence over self discipline. We embraced the philosophy of do what feels good, follow your heart, and live with your own truth. Respect for authority became optional, personal desires became sacred. Accountability becomes someone else's responsibility. Marriage became much less important, families became fragmented, fathers were increasingly treated as optional participants and all too willingly fill that role. Where any healthy male could father a child, but they wouldn't stick around to be the dad and the essential leader in the home. And that nonsense has grown to be accepted. Entertainment has been glorified as rebellion, selfishness, and moral confusion while presenting these things as virtues. At the same time, parents stopped parenting and started trying to be friends with their children. Why is that? Well, friendship is easy, parenting is hard. Parenting requires saying no when it's unpopular. It requires enforcing standards when a child doesn't like them. It requires enduring temporary frustration in order to build lifelong character. Yet today, too many parents seem terrified of upsetting their little homegrown terrorist. Adding fuel to that fire is the modern tendency to view strength, discipline, and authority as something suspicious. We hear the endless criticism of nonsense such as toxic masculinity while witnessing a growing absence of strong fathers willing to lead their homes with conviction, integrity, and moral courage. The result? Oh, that's children increasingly viewing their parents as service providers and Ubers rather than authority figures. Televisions, phones, and tablets have replaced babysitters. Family meals are interrupted by screens and screams. Parents surrender control of the conversation, the schedule, and the household decision to the youngest members of the family. Yes, my friends, it appears the inmates are truly running the asylum. When I was growing up, children were not taught that parents existed to obey them. It was actually quite the opposite. Disrespect brought consequences. Tantrums brought consequences. Defiance brought consequences you learned you really didn't like. Phrases like spare the rod and spoil the child, train up a child in the way they should go, and when they're old, they won't depart from it, were regularly quoted. In the presence of adults, children were expected to sit down, shut up, listen, and observe. We lived in communities where adults looked out for neighborhood children. We respected those who had earned wisdom through experience. We understood that authority was not something to be mocked, it was something to be valued. Schools reinforced those same principles. If we got in trouble, our parents didn't automatically assume the teacher was wrong. Teachers and parents worked together. Accountability didn't stop at the classroom door. If you were punished at school, you were punished at home. If you were paddled at school, chances were your backside got warmed up again when you got home. Churches reinforced those values as well. We weren't entertained every moment. We didn't bring our entire toy box with us to keep us occupied during a church service. No, sir. We were expected to sit, listen, learn, and behave appropriately. Respect wasn't optional. Act out in church and it earned you a trip to the exits. But it wasn't to the hallway to run. It wasn't to the nursery for fun and games. When you returned, you weren't smiling. Chances were your eyes had tears in them. Nope, you received a tune-up to your backside, and back in church you went. Strangely enough, we quit acting up in the house of God. Those institutions, families, schools, church, and community worked together to shape responsible adults. They taught us to respect others, to honor our parents, to value hard work, to accept responsibility, to understand that rights and responsibilities go hand in hand. But today, too often, that opposite message is being taught. Teachers are questioned at every turn. Pastors are largely ignored. Church has become optional if that rascal teenager don't want to go. Law enforcement is criticized at best and attacked at worst for simply enforcing the law. Children are encouraged to believe the world revolves around their wants, feelings, and comfort. Then we act surprised when these little heathens grow up into adults who struggle with authority, responsibility, self-control. The reason for all this is because when parental authority breaks down, society suffers. Maybe it's time to return to some old-fashioned principles. Maybe children need more responsibilities and fewer excuses. Maybe they need chores, accountability, and expectations and jobs when they're old enough to do so. Maybe they need to learn that every privilege comes attached to a responsibility. Bad consequences result from bad actions. Boundaries are to be observed. Test them at your own peril. Maybe they need to understand the golden rule of parenting. He who has the goal makes the rules. And since you're living here rent-free, you don't get a vote. Children and teenagers need to understand that families are not, in fact, democracies. No, they are dictatorships with the parents doing all of the dictating. Maybe they need to understand that parents are not equal, not negotiators, and certainly they are not employees. Parents are, well, parents. Their job is not to make children comfortable. Their job is to prepare them to life. That means teaching discipline, respect, and self-control, teaching character, because the goal is not happy children. The goal is to raise responsible, well-balanced, productive adults. And responsible adults are rarely the result of permissive parenting. Back when parents were parents, children learned responsibility and respect, accountability. Families were stronger, communities were stronger. Society benefited from the values being taught at home. Perhaps what we need today isn't another parenting trend, another self-help book, or God help us, another expert telling us how to negotiate with a toddler. Maybe we need mothers and fathers who go on Amazon and get themselves a spine and then be willing to reclaim the God-given responsibility to lead their homes. Maybe parents need to stop apologizing for being parents. And maybe, just maybe, the greatest gift we can give the next generation is not free range or unlimited freedom, but the wisdom, discipline, and guidance that they so desperately need. At least, well, that's how I see it. So until next time, go be a parent.